Hi, David Vizard here, and you are watching PowerTec 10. If you care to give me a few minutes of your time, in return, I will give you the benefit of my over 50 years of race-winning engine building experience. Okay, now down to business. This will be part 3 of our, for us, monster cylinder head test. In this test, we're going to take the dyno figures of the head that Charlie and I did between us. Charlie did his magic on the ports, that is finishing them with the cutters so that they resembled a fine golf ball finish. Guy's just gifted at this. I did the chambers, right? And this combination worked out very well. What we'll look at now is the flow bench data that we got from this cylinder head, and then we'll move on to the dyno testing. Now, you'll notice when I do present the dyno testing, I use a piece of video that I've used before to introduce the dyno test team. That's because we tested a whole bunch of cylinder heads all at once, and I only thought to do one introduction because I thought I was going to do 3 or 4 cylinder heads at a time. Well, that didn't work out because we got far too much information on each head to be able to do that. So it's one head at a time. So you'll just have to take a look at Charlie and Jack and Terry in the same intro video. So that's my excuse for that. So here we go. Test, flow bench test data. So here's our flow tests. Here's where we were on test 2 with John's cylinder heads here. Intake, exhaust. Right? Peaked at 600, 225, and 500, 154 on the exhaust. Here is the one that, now don't forget John's was done to represent a typical cylinder head. This is not the best that John can do, it's what I asked him for. Right, test number 2. This was one that Charlie and I did. Charlie did the ports, I did the chambers, as I mentioned before. 234 CFM, 166, although we're not going to be lifting much more than about 550. So it's about 232, 160-ish. For actual stuff. Now let's look at the graphs here because they tell the story much better. Well, here's the graphs of the 2 cylinder heads. The thin lines are John's cylinder heads that we tested in episode 26. Right? This is the flow figures that Charlie and I got from our E7s with using our IOP program to guide the way. We gain up here, but we lose some here, but it doesn't show up much on here. But look at this here. This, small though it may be on this graph, is actually quite significant. To see that, let's go and look at the discharge coefficient figures. This is the intake flow efficiency, or to give it its proper name, the discharge coefficient. Here is our latest rendering, Charlie and I's head, and here's John's head with a conventional 3-angle valve job, right? You'll notice that our valve job here was far more efficient. Now, you may hear a lot about it's not good to have too much flow at low lift. Well, that is pretty close to BS, right? Don't forget we're using a short cam here, right? And the more flow we have at low lift, the more it seems that the valve is being opened faster, right? And so that overcomes the limitation there. Having good low lift flow and utilizing it properly makes the motor hang on up the top end. Now I know that seems kind of contrary to what you may have heard, to say good low lift flow means you have good low speed torque. No, that's total misconception of what's going on. If we come down here, we see that there's an upturn here at about the 0.25D mark. This indicates our port could have done with some more biasing on it, and that would have probably brought that curve up here. You could probably have made somewhere around 245, 250 CFM. But this here is still a basic deal. Let's now go and look at the exhaust, because there's some factors there that play quite a big story in this game. What you see here is the exhaust. You can see that John's exhaust was pretty good, better than ours through most of it, the lift curve. But look here, this is where we get a lot of the blowdown phase happen, and the flow of ours with its superior exhaust seat was better. That there is just this section here that occurs there is worth foot-pounds of torque throughout the RPM range. Also, our exhaust is showing that it's quite well biased. What we needed to do is to work on this midsection here, right? John had the drop on us there. Now, we're still not done here. Let's take a look at the port velocity. Intake port velocity. Both heads achieved good peak velocities. You'll notice that John's head or heads were very close to ours in peak velocity, but they're good all the way through. Like I said, the magic number is 300, and John's heads got to the 300 mark in the operating range, right, which is good. Our head was where we focused on the velocity as part of the IOP recommendations, showed better results, so we'd expect to see some more torque from this. Let's now take a look at the exhaust. Okay, now here's where we see a big difference. Our port velocity was probably a little more than it should have been. We could have traded some velocity for more flow, but we opted to stay there because this is a street head and we wanted to see good low speed torque, which is exactly what a velocity curve like this will do. At low speed, this will continue. The speed of the port is high enough so that it continues to flow out the right way, so reversion is cut to a minimum. John's port velocity, and this is typical of cylinder heads ported as per I requested, was down at the 252. That's too low, right? But that's where they are mostly. So we'll have to see what that translates to when we look at the dyno figures.
Terry Walters, team leader, 42 years in the business.
Jack Sane, nearly 40 years experience, engine tuner.
Charlie Savidio, cylinder head porter, 30 years plus cylinder head experience. Today, I'm a dyno assistant.
Okay, at this point the head's going to be changed. Now we're going to put on E7 TE head that Charlie modified, and that flows a lot better. So let's see where we go with that. Here's the idle speed, 670 or so RPM. This is the result of the first pull. We haven't set the timing or checked the need for any different carburation yet, but basically this cylinder head is up by some 72 horsepower. This is the high energy port head developed using the IOP program, and horsepower wise we are up by torque-wise, we are up by 337 to 364, I think, but we're up about 20 or so foot-pounds on torque and peak torque. Right, so now we're going to try tweaking the ignition a little bit and checking out the carburation. We may not be at its best yet. What you see here are the peak torque numbers. Question you may ask here: has our IOP program delivered the promise of predicting what we should see? Peak torque numbers with the stock head. John Russello's peak torque number 359.6, say 360. Ours 370.5. So our peak torque numbers look good, but how is the curve overall? Let's look at the torque curve now. Here then is the moment of truth when it comes to port energy. Stock. John's torque curve, Charlie's and mine torque curve. Right, you will see that in spite of it being a slightly larger port, it is just a tad up on both curves here. Now then, I have to say, we're only talking 2 or 3 foot-pounds here, and that gets to be close to the limit of what we can read. So don't put too much stock in this. The only sure thing you can say is it didn't lose any low-speed torque over a much smaller port head because of port velocity and port energy. The other thing is you can see that it hung on much better. That'll show up more on the horsepower curve. But we are up considerably from the stock figures here in terms of torque when it comes to peaks. John's curve there is up 22 foot-pounds over the stock head. Ours is up 33, leaving ours 11 foot-pounds better than this, and this is a good curve, so this is excellent. Now let's look at the power figures. Referencing our peak numbers, we see the stock heads produced just shy of 282 horsepower. John's heads 343, so that's up by some 60 odd horsepower. Our heads 80 horsepower. That's pretty good gain. Now, if you want to relate this to a 351, these heads here that we've shown you here will deliver close on 100 horsepower increase, and you can do all this at home. All you have to do is follow what I say in my subsequent videos, and I am going to be doing a special on porting E7TE heads, all the way from mild porting right up to super porting, which on a 351 we could expect about 115 horsepower increase in a situation like this, but we'll get to that down the road. For now, let's take a look at the power curves. And here they are, the power curves. Stock heads, John's heads, our heads, right? You can see some pretty substantial gains each way, right? I've quoted the gains just a moment ago. But now let's have a look at something a little more meaningful. How much power is available to us over the RPM band that we're using when we're racing? Assuming a stock gearbox, we're going to have about a 1200 RPM band. We need to take the curves that give the best power over the last 1200 RPM. So we're going to be going from about 4 to 5.2 with the stock one, and about 4.6 to 5.8 with these. The results will surprise you. With the stock heads, we had 252 horsepower available to us over the 1200 RPM that we would use during racing. With John's heads, we had 330 horsepower. That's up by almost 80 horsepower. That car is going to be a lot faster. Our heads here, we're only just shy of 100 horsepower up. Another 6 horsepower, and I could have said, look at that, another 100 horsepower gain. We're not done yet. We're going to move on to some more cylinder heads, and you'll see even bigger gains over this. Just like and subscribe, and you'll get there. Before closing here, I need to say a few things, right? Just to make sure we've got both feet on the ground here, well, at least as far as you viewers are concerned. First, I'm not including a lot of details on these head that we've ported here. That's because I'm going to be doing a very detailed E7TE porting head video, which will go through all the different stages that we've gone through here with our dyno tests. Now, that said, it's going to be a pretty comprehensive deal. Basically, I'm going to show you how, like I said earlier, to get about 110, 115 horsepower increase on this head. Now, there's going to be a lot of doubters here, but bear in mind, I'm not the guy doing the dyno testing, right? So these are figures that are done by an independent entity. Now, we're going to have a couple of different people being in on the dyno testing, and they're certainly only going to give you the results we get. And I know there's going to be plenty of professionals out there, or disgruntled high-tech amateurs who've I've rubbed them up the wrong way by contradicting something here and then proving it. That's what really ticks people off, is when I tell them they're wrong and then go ahead and prove it with the dyno testing, right? So I know that one of the factory teams absolutely would have nothing to do with me when I showed that every single page of their how to tune a particular engine was wrong. They said, do this first, do that first. It was all wrong. Completely backwards. And the worst part of it is, it wasn't my opinion, it was Mr. Dyno's opinion, right? And that's a pretty stout opinion to have to take issue with. Anyway, before I sign off here, I really need to remind you that we do rely on your likes, your subscriptions, the notify issue, and your comments. If you want to make a negative comment, a negative criticism, please let us know what it is. If you're going to hit that dislike button, right, tell us why. It doesn't help us if you dislike it, but you don't say why. So please tell us why. And can you do it politely? And third, if you're going to be critical, let's have it under your own name so that we know who we're dealing with. I don't post stuff under anybody else's name but me. Everything you see that I say on these videos, I own. These names where you have big negative criticisms and you post it under another name it's a little cowardly, right? Just put it bluntly, it's a little cowardly. I don't have a lot of respect for people who will post something under a pen name that is critical of somebody else who is posting under their real name. It means I can't answer back. But anyway, let's go up with the credit there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, the notify, and the comment. Be sure to stay tuned for our next video. If you're a head porter, you're going to like that. It's in the 5 rules of head porting deal. So I will see you down the road. Thanks for watching.